Welcome everyone to today's MyHR webinar thinking about managing employee conversations. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really thrilled to have you and we're working across 3 different territories today with my colleagues Julie Morris, who's our country manager for Canada, and Nicole, who's our country manager for Australia. Thank you for your patience as we get started, coordinating across 3 different time zones. Just took us a second this morning with our tech, but we're really pleased to be here. We've got some really excellent content for you today, and it's always a thrill for me to co-present with people who are much more capable and much more experienced than me, because I always learn something too. So just a quick tech test. We've got quite a few people on the call today, which is fantastic. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand or letting us know that you can hear and see me coming through clearly. Yep, we've got heaps of hands going through. Fantastic. It's the value of doing a bit of a tech run before, as we hopefully, when we get everyone in, don't have too many issues. So today's session, I'm just going to share my screen so we can jump into things, is about making sure that we are prepared for managing employee pay conversations, and making sure that we are doing the best we can to navigate these in less stressful ways or less difficult ways. So we'll get into what we're going to talk about, but first, again, let me just introduce you to my fantastic co-presenters today. Julie, lovely to have you on the call. Thanks for joining us from Canada. What time is it where you are?
It is 1 o'clock here, and we just got some fresh snow today. So, yeah, we thought maybe we were on our way to spring, but lots of snow on the hills today. So, fortunately, not right on the ground, just up on the hills. But I'm ready for spring anytime. But excited to be here today and really looking forward to this conversation. I get asked lots of questions about this, so glad to pull some content together here
Yeah,
and to
hey,
present with both of you.
Pay is such a tricky topic. In whatever country
Mhm.
you're in, people have big feelings about what they get paid. So I think there'll be some really good learnings here for our Canadian guests as well. And Nicole, lovely to see you. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Good morning. It's 8 a.m. in lovely Sydney. I'm still pre-coffee, but I promise you I'm going to be on my best behavior. And yeah, finally a little bit of cool weather in Sydney after a bit of a hot one yesterday. Good to be with you all.
Thanks for joining us, Nicole. Lovely to see you as always. So let's kick into what we're going to be talking about today. But of course, as always, a bit of housekeeping. So the first thing to be aware of is that this session is designed for people, leaders, managers, and business owners. So if you have the responsibility for making decisions about pay in your business or contributing to pay and remuneration conversations, this will be a fantastic session for you to get some value out of. If you are an employee who wants to know better how to negotiate for your own pay or how to show up in pay conversations prepared, this is not a session that we've designed for employees, so you might want to have a look at some resources elsewhere. But if you do choose to duck out, we won't name and shame you. If you found yourself in a webinar that maybe isn't the best place for you at the moment, that's totally cool. That happens all the time. But just being really clear about who this session is for, because yeah, pay conversations obviously are a two-way street. So questions are super welcome. This is the webinar that we have had our personal best for the most questions pre-submitted of any webinar, which is fantastic. Towards the end of the session, we've got these pre-submitted questions up, and myself, Julie, and Nicole will take turns going through and answering them. If you do have questions as you go through, please pop them in. Again, these sessions are designed to be useful for our audience. If it's stuff that we haven't covered off or that you want to dive deeper into, we'd really welcome your question. If you'd like it to be anonymous, you've got the anonymous button there. And just be aware that because the webinar is being recorded, your question will be accessible and viewable for others afterwards. So if you want to make use of the anonymous function, go ahead. If anything does come through to us, which has identifying details like someone's name or their business, we'll do our best to scrub them as we're answering them. And if there's any question that we didn't answer, you are very welcome to get in touch with us afterwards and flick your questions through. But we'll do our best to leave plenty of time for Q&A, because we've got the pre-submitted ones, and then usually there's a few that come through on the call. So I flagged the webinar recording will be available after the session, which means if you need to take a call or duck out, you're very welcome to, no stress, you'll be able to access it later on. Again, it does just mean that any questions will be recorded and available afterwards. So just be aware of that before we kick off. Alrighty. So what are we going to expect today, and what are we covering off? So the first thing is there will be a legal update from New Zealand, Australia and Canada about the pay-related laws that are changing in our countries. Nicole, Julie and I will speak to each of those. And then we'll start talking about getting remuneration right. So what does this involve? What are some of the things you should be aware of? Kind of a big picture piece to consider in terms of why remuneration matters. We'll cover off the legalities, so some of the kind of process pieces you need to be aware of. We'll talk about how you should manage pay and what's happening there. We'll finally talk about managing the actual pay conversation, especially if an employee's frustrated or unhappy with the increase that they did or didn't get. And then, as I flagged earlier, we will have some time for questions. Now, one of the things that's a bit tricky is that because I've had some tech issues with my monitor this morning, I can't remember or see who I've assigned to speak to each slide. So I'm hoping that Julie and Nicole will be able to see that on their end. Yeah, fantastic. So what I might do is when I know there's a section change, I'll just ask them to jump in and let me know which of them is taking it. So thanks for your patience as we are slightly less smoothly organised today than we would otherwise have liked to have been. So this is the slide, of course, that we always include so people know who it is that we are and why we're doing this session. So MyHR has been making HR easy for small businesses since 2013. So 13 years ago, we've been in business. And what we are is an outsourced HR provider covering all employment matters. So we do the proactive stuff around pay benchmarking, around salary reviews, around pay increase letters for your business. Of course, we cover the other sides of HR, including performance reviews, onboarding, making sure your policies and compliance are up to scratch, all the way through to what I think of as the pointy end of HR. So your disciplinary processes, your warnings, your terminations, termination for medical incapacity, in New Zealand managing ACC, and in Australia and Canada managing their systems over there as well. So there's not a lot that we haven't done or haven't seen, which is why when it comes to talking about pay, we're pretty confident that we have some useful information to share or some useful value to add, because there's so much that we touch in terms of the employee life cycle. And the way that we deliver our services is a bit different. So we have expert HR people in the background who are our HR advisors and employment relations specialists, backed by a really advanced HRIS platform that has some AI baked into it, which means we can deliver at scale. So it's a really powerful, really easy to use HRIS system that is designed for small business. You don't need a qualification in information systems to implement MyHR in your business. It's really easy to use. You've got an onboarding manager who works with you as you sign up to us, and then of course your HR experts in the background to deal with people issues as they may come along. We now support employers in New Zealand, Canada, and Australia, which is why the three of us are on the call. And our customers are really varied in size. So our smallest has 1 employee. Our largest business in New Zealand that we support has around 750 staff. Rosine Paints is our largest client, and then everything in between. There's not a lot that we haven't seen or touched, which means that when something does happen in your business, as it inevitably will, you've got a really experienced team who know what they're talking about to support. Importantly, because we're a SaaS business, the way that our fees work is it's a monthly subscription fee based on your headcount. So unlike lawyers or consultants, we don't bill you every 6 minutes. You might talk to us 20 times in February because you've got questions about how you're going to manage your performance review cycle for the end of the year coming up in March in New Zealand for the financial year. Someone might have punched a colleague and you have to deal with that issue. There's a new starter who's landing who needs a bit of support figuring out kind of what their employment agreement looks like. Then you might only call us once in March. Your cost remains the same because it's that subscription fee rather than based on usage. So without further ado, let's kick into our content here and we'll start with our legal update. So 2 pieces from New Zealand, and we're going to be talking about what's going on with the laws sort of regarding pay. So last year, the Theft by Employer Amendment Act passed and is now part of our criminal law. So employers now can face criminal prosecution if you don't pay employees what they're entitled to without a reasonable excuse. Having a pay run delayed because some shit happened with your payroll provider and you couldn't have kind of controlled it, you won't be liable for a criminal penalty in that circumstance. It's out of your control. And in terms of an individual, if you're the person who's held liable, it's up to 1 year in prison or a fine not exceeding $5,000. For an entity, so the limited liability company or the charity or the partnership, it's a fine not exceeding $30,000. So this is not retroactive. Anything that happened before March 2025 isn't kind of subject to criminal proceedings under this law change. But do be aware that if there are any inconsistencies in your pay or if you're withholding pay from people that they should be entitled to, criminal penalties are now a risk that you might need to manage or to be aware of. Next piece from New Zealand. So this is the pay secrecy law that passed towards the middle of last year. So now, regardless of what their employment agreement says, employees can safely discuss their pay at work with colleagues, with people in their team, with people who aren't in their team, and employers can't basically do anything to retaliate or punish them. This might be like social ostracization, like just kind of cold shouldering them and being difficult. It could be denying them promotions. It might be issuing them with a warning. Any of that kind of action is considered adverse conduct. And if employers behave that way towards the employees, the employee now has grounds for a new personal grievance based on that adverse conduct. So this is currently law. It came into play in August 2025. If you have a pay secrecy clause in your employment agreement, which says something like pay is confidential, can't be discussed. If you do, it will be considered a breach of this agreement. You don't have to remove that clause from your agreement, so you don't have to go through a whole documentation update process, but it's unenforceable. Even though it's in there, the law supersedes your employment agreements. You can't punish people or manage the situation if they have discussed their pay at work. So handing over to Julie to talk about the changes in Canada.
Yeah, so in Canada, some interesting changes, very similar to what you're seeing in New Zealand. So we have the Pay Transparency Act. So if you look across Canada, each province has slightly different acts. Pay Transparency Act is actually a BC Act, so based in BC, but obviously we consult across Canada. But we're seeing real similarities in all the provinces. But Pay Transparency talks about making sure that it's really clear what people are being paid. So when a job is posted, the wage must be listed there for the job posting. Same thing, you cannot bar employees from talking about their wages or what they're getting paid. And we also, in BC now, you can't ask someone, what they were paid in a previous role. So you can ask them what their salary expectations are, but you cannot ask them what were they paid. And this whole legislation is really aimed at reducing the gender pay gap. So huge gender pay gap across Canada. They're doing some reporting every year on it and really aiming to cut that, to stop that happening, that men are generally being paid about 10% more than women. So it's coming across all provinces. In Ontario, the Pay Transparency Act, it applies to businesses with 25 plus employees. So under 25, you're not there. But there actually has to be pay transparency reporting happening now in BC, where you actually have to report out what you're paying each employee. If you're over 100 employees at this point, it keeps getting lower and lower. So yeah, some really interesting legislation there. Nicole,
Awesome.
do you have
Yes,
anything
I'll jump in. Yes, Sylvie, I think there's a next slide for Australia, please. Amazing. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Sylvie. I won't touch on the pay transparency. It's also applicable in Australia, and it's also for the gender pay gap purposes as well. But similar to New Zealand, the criminal and civil penalties for underpayments are in effect from 2025. More importantly, late last year, there was a big case with Woolworths Group, which is a retail sector, around annualised entitlements. So for your modern award covered employees, if you take everything that they're entitled to in the modern award and turn that into an annual figure, rather than having to work out what overtime or penalties you owe them every pay run, you must always ensure that you're always checking, ideally every fortnight, not just annually, checking that they are better off overall with that annual salary. That's a big one, and sort of that's exposing employers with modern award coverage at the moment. So please pay attention to that. There are some award classification changes happening in various modern awards. So check the awards that apply to your business. Things like Children's Services Awards, the SHADS Awards, and others as well. There are a number of classification definition changes, and also the salary or the wages attached to them are being reviewed as well. Again, also looking at those sectors that have a lot of female employees and what that pay parity or that pay gap is looking like from a modern award perspective, which is good. And then a few more. Payday Super. So from 1 July 2026, this is a huge one for payroll. So please tune in, ask your payroll provider, your accountants, your bookkeepers, and from a business cash flow perspective, please be mindful that from 1 July 2026, which is a few months away, super will be paid at the same time as wages are paid. Currently, we pay super every quarter, but the legislation is changing that you pay super at the same time as paying the wages, obviously, so that the super funds can be invested a lot sooner within that quarter as well. Lastly, the Fair Work Amendment, Protecting Penalty and Overtime Rates Bill 2025. That's a big mouthful. It's currently being finalised as a piece of legislative change, essentially protecting, not allowing modern awards or agreements from reducing overtime or penalty rate amounts. So it's a bit of a protection bill. Keep an eye out for that one, or ask us for an update when it's released. Awesome. Back to you, Sylvie or Julie, I think.
Perfect. Thanks, team. So Julie, I'll hand over you to kick us off with talking about getting remuneration right. Take it away.
Absolutely. So can you just click the slides through here for me, Sylvie? Oh, yeah, perfect. This was actually your slide, Sylvie, but I'm happy to speak to it if you would like to.
I'll jump
great.
in.
So
we can make things a bit more straightforward.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
So pay is obviously something that has lots of emotions surrounding it, right? But there are some practical reasons to want to get it right as well. And the first is that pay is actually a hygiene factor. We know that when people get paid lots and lots and lots and lots of money, it doesn't increase your happiness at all. So it can be a massive cost to the business. But the reason pay matters is that being paid poorly makes people really, really unhappy. So you have this kind of risk factor to manage with pay in terms of when you feel like you're being paid unfairly or like you're being paid not what you're worth, you feel really stink and really grumpy about it. But if you are getting paid what you're worth or you're getting paid more, there isn't kind of a corresponding increase in happiness. So we need to get pay right to stop people being unhappy, but it's not a lever that we can use to make our team over the moon to be here and to be working for us. Of course, paying poorly affects retention. If you pay badly compared to other employers, you'll lose staff. And certainly in smaller markets like New Zealand, in niche industries or in smaller cities and towns, it can be really obvious what people are getting paid. People talk, and so if you pay badly compared to others, inevitably you are going to lose staff because you just don't have the pay to kind of compare. Obviously, it affects recruitment. If you're going to market and trying to and get people to come back into your business, if you're not paying a competitive rate, people just won't apply for the job. Lots of job boards these days will have filters where people can say, I want a role that pays between 60 and 80 grand or 70 and 90 grand. And if you're not showing up in those searches, people just won't be applying for your ad. Also, there's been over the last, what would you say, team? Probably last kind of 10 to 15 years or maybe 10 to 12 years, more of a move towards pay transparency. So lots of job ads these days will actually have the pay rates on there. Again, it's really easy for people to see if you are paying competitive rates, and if you're not, it's going to be really hard to recruit people. There's a reputational issue. Again, people talk. Just over time, it'll be difficult for you to keep people and replace them in your business because you're known to be an underpayer. And of course, we care because cash flow. There's no sense in paying significantly above market rates to make sure you can recruit and hire people, because in this economy, most businesses don't have the fat in their margins to be able to outlay kind of significant costs on salaries and wages. So we need to be really thoughtful around the impact on cash flow, kind of managing all the costs our business are carrying, because we don't have a lot of room to be making things up and recovering. So jumping on, Julie, are we next here? Getting some nods. I'll hand over to Julie.
Yeah, awesome. So when we're talking about the legalities, we've got a few kind of minimums here, right? So obviously, I'm sure you're all aware that we have minimum wages in all the three countries that we have here, and actually for Canada, across every province, we have minimum wages as well. BC just went through a number of minimum wage increases, and now over the last 4 years, we're kind of at $17.85 as the minimum wage. New Zealand there, $23.95 as the minimum wage. Interesting how different it is there, right? And then minimum wage in Australia is $24.95. So major disparity between the three countries there. New Zealand has KiwiSaver, which is, 3% in addition to base pay. We have in Canada, we pay CPP directly. So there is no additional KiwiSaver is a retirement benefit. Is that right, Sophie? Awesome. Fantastic. And then going down the list here, lots of different options on how you can pay things here. So, paying in Canada, you can still pay with a check, which is probably very surprising for New Zealand and Australia, but you can actually write a check. It's not very common or very popular. We had a client that just took on MyHR, and one of the employees, when they found out we were taking on, they're like, can you stop us getting paid by check? And I'm like, well, that's not exactly what we do, but we will gently encourage. Bank transfers, checks, all those things. But like Sylvie said at the beginning, it really is a hygiene factor, right? It's really like the bottom level of if you're not going to get anything right, at least get how much you're paying people right and get it into their bank accounts on time. So really, really important there. Obviously, the Pay Transparency Acts, I think, are going a long way towards eliminating discrimination and gender disparity. So it's very exciting to see those things. I think they're really a positive thing. I think the secrecy around pay needs to go away. It does make it harder for businesses, but that's where we can help and where we're going to give you some advice today on, how to make it more easier to know what you're paying people and then be transparent about it. So I think it's a really positive piece. And obviously, if you're paying wrong, that's when you're going to end up in challenges. We see that in Canada with overtime rates, and we have averaging agreements. So making sure you're doing all of those things right so that you're not getting it wrong and you're not ending up at Employment Standards Branch to discuss a simple little thing that wasn't done quite right. Awesome. So we're going to talk about, Nicole and I are going to share the next section, and we're actually going to talk about different strategies, different kind of processes and strategies for actually how you decide what to pay your people. And I'm not surprised we had so many registrants on this webinar because, as I said at the beginning, there is a lot about this. And we tend to start a small business and start paying people. And then it's as the business gets bigger or you've been around for a longer time that you start to go wait a second, how often am I supposed to increase people's salary? And oh, my labor cost is growing. Is it growing the way it should be growing? So, so a couple of different options. So one of them is an ad hoc process. So basically, you pay people what you think. And you increase them maybe when they ask or when you go, oh, we had a great year, I'm going to do it. So ad hoc, it means you don't actually have a system or a structure to it. So some of the pros for that is maximum flexibility, minimum bureaucracy and admin. So you're just doing it as it comes up, whatever you think. It can feel more tailored and personal to the individual employees. It can allow for a quick response to exceptional performance. And it does avoid that rigid one size fits all sort of compensation structure. And it doesn't take ages to set up. You just start paying people and you make decisions based on what you're seeing right in front of you. So that would be an ad hoc. And I'd say we see that in a lot of businesses that are sort of in the 1 to 20 range. We definitely see that ad hoc more commonly there. Some of the pros, some of the cons to that is, it relies on skilled managers, right? So it relies on kind of having an overall understanding of what the role is worth, and being able to sort of weigh out the job that someone's doing and whether you're paying it accurately. So it can lead to a bit of favoritism if someone's asking for a pay increase, or it can lead to this what we call the halo effect, where you see something great and you increase the compensation for that one great piece. And then you look at the overall and go, is that pay matching? So yeah, that's an unbiased decision making, and it can lead to inequitable pay differences. So you might have someone that's really comfortable speaking about pay and they're asking you regularly for a pay increase, and you have a really hard worker that never says anything about pay and is not comfortable having that conversation. And before you know it, they're being paid very differently, and they might be doing the same work and performing equally as well as one another. It can make budgeting and financial planning more challenging. So if you don't know when you're going to give a pay increase, or you don't have a plan on how the wages are going to go up, it can be difficult right there. And it can make it harder to defend compensation decisions as if challenged. So this worked particularly well when no one ever talked about pay, right? It was easier when no one talked about pay. You could just pay people what you wanted. But this whole pay transparency piece and that whole how people are talking about money, that they're much more open about it does make it more challenging if you're using an ad hoc process, and that lack of transparency for employees, right? That idea of well, how do you get a raise or an increase here? Or how do we know if I'm doing a good job if my pay never changes? Those type of things. And it can be difficult to benchmark against market rates systematically. The other thing I find about ad hoc is it can mean that the pay is on the table all the time, right? At any time of the year, you're having a conversation about pay because you haven't set up a system or process for it. In the opposite is a structured pay process. So with a structured pay process, what you're going to see is you're going to make some decisions around what time of year you do pay increases. They may or may not happen, but you would have a time of year where you would say, listen, at this time of year, we review the pay that people have. You may have salary bands that are part of a structured pay process. So Nicole's going to talk a little bit more about like different types of processes. But the pros for these are that you know when to expect a structured pay process. It reduces potential bias and favoritism. So you might have an area where you can add a little bit back on for performance, but you're really tying it to the potential job. It definitely supports your systematic budgeting and finance planning. So knowing what your cost of labor is going to be for. And it does increase employee confidence and compensation decisions. So a lot of really strong research on the idea that if you take pay off the table, you pay people fairly and it's transparent and clear, you give them the opportunity to really flourish in their job because they're not focused on like, am I getting paid right? You're getting paid well, you're getting paid for the role you're doing. Now let's really talk about the other ways to engage you in your job. Much more objective in terms of performance management, so you can tie those two together. More accurate benchmarking. You can take things like cost of living increase into account when you're making decisions in a structured pay process, and it can be easier to manage compensation across the org, right? So there's less of that drift, right? The cons to a structured pay process would be things like, it does take time and investment to develop it initially. It can feel less personalized and less flexible. It can feel a bit impersonal, right? It's like, great, you've been here a year and you're at this level now. Here's what we're paying you. So there's ways to make it feel a little bit more personal, but it can be. There is a risk of becoming too rigid and too mechanical. So that might be, where you've like they're in the band, they're there, but having some flexibility so you don't lose some top talent for a small increase that you might be able to provide. It can be challenging to update and maintain. So you can do a whole bunch of work on setting up your bands and then they're out of date. They can become out of date, right, as cost of living increases. Yeah, and you might not be able to quickly respond to individual exceptional circumstances. So those are kind of those two pieces there. And Nicole, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about the pay strategies. So Nicole's going to talk about like, how do you decide what to pay if you have a structured plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Julie. I want to set the scene real quick before we go into the three options for pay strategy. You heard us just earlier talk about the minimum wages for each of the three countries. So the work I'm about to talk about, which is pay below market, is not about paying below those minimum rates. It's about paying below the market, what other companies are paying. And I'll go into that shortly. But in that structured versus unstructured world, and there's merit to both of them based on your size, your industry, you would be even potentially being intentional about being unstructured for good reasons, and then you may move to being structured later on, also for good reasons. So everything that Julie has just described is not just about a black and white, am I or am I not? It could be that your business is in one of those categories at any given time, and then you sort of move into a more structured as you grow effectively. When you do have a structured world, you really should be thinking about, and even without that, even if you're in an ad hoc space, you should be thinking about for salaries that I don't have, for jobs where I don't have clear market data or clear modern awards telling me what to pay. Where am I getting that salary information from? We have access to salary surveys. You could be thinking about your own internal salary bands. You'd be thinking about job family frameworks or capability frameworks that says, I want to think about, I have a junior engineer, a mid-level engineer, and a senior engineer, and these are the salary bands roughly that fit into each of these. That's what Julie's talking about, where that starts to become too rigid and not flexible enough, but at least it gives you a little bit of a guide around how you're approaching compensation or remuneration for your company. So with that context, and you've got some salary data, whether that's your internal banding or benchmarking, thinking about it from an external point of view and external survey points, You want to think about strategically where you're positioning yourself. And so they're the three options that we're about to talk you through. First one being you decide to pay below market rates. I say that with intention, yet you decide to pay below market rates. My preference for you is that you don't accidentally find out that you've paid below market rate. My preference for you as a business is do the work, do the research, then decide. I've worked with a lot of industries, aged care being one that comes to mind, where yes, we do, for one provider I have in mind, we did decide to pay below market rates given our position as the size of our company, our financial position, where we are from a cash flow point of view. However, we were very intentional about the rest of the benefits and what we built from an employee value proposition, what we offer for you to come and join us. If it's not the salary, that's the attractive part of it. So on the one hand, this option reduces cost, has less impact on cash flow. However, you will be experiencing, or you will be accepting some churn or some turnover. So with people leaving you, or people are being unhappy or looking to be compensated in different ways. So I want you to think about, what culture do I design to make sure that people stay for the culture? I come for the money, I stay for the people. And the people is a big part of it. Anyone who's run an employee engagement survey, you would have so much data that says to you, the people who are engaged, there's a correlation between the team that they're a part of and the people leader or the leadership in that organization that they work with. So don't underestimate the power of having good people around you or designing a great team to retain your high performers. Interesting work. Am I involved in interesting work that actually makes me want to stay, regardless of where I'm being, where I am in the market? And of course, is this a charity or not for profit? Aged care as a sector that I've just mentioned just now, that is that's a sector that particular company I have in mind was a not-for-profit organization. And so you are intentionally thinking about, if I'm paying below market rates, what am I offering as a charity? In Australia, there is a DGR, I don't know what it stands for, but it's effectively a status for your company being a charity, and so your employees get taxed a little bit less. So that's a benefit, or that's a reason to attract talent to your industry. Glamour industry, it could be that you're getting paid, but you're getting awesome access to events or concerts or discounts, whatever it may be. Or finally, it may be that you're paying equity as well as the salary, if you think about a startup kind of structure as well there. Option 2 is you can see the flow of these section. Option 2 is to pay market rate. And so taking paying out of the equation when competing for talent, and just paying the middle of the road, or paying that average pay rate. That is what everyone else is paying. We have this conversation at the moment a lot with organizations that are building their sales department. And so thinking about, there isn't a lot of modern award. There isn't any modern award that guides, in Australia at least, what to pay my sales guys and girls. And that is, from a business development manager level, or from a account exec or a business development representative point of view. Some organizations choose to pay market rate, but then think about your commission structure and your bonus structure. So that's another example of where paying that market-based salary comes into play. I'll just get Sylvie to pull up the rest of the slides. I was doing so well remembering everything, but then I'm like, I better check what's on there first. So it can be difficult to know what others are paying if you don't have market survey data available for your specific size or industry or a specific role. It still doesn't entirely remove risk for employee turnover or churn. That's because that whole thing that I spoke about around engagement and the people I work with and the leaders I report to is still a very big part of it. I don't just stick around for pay if these other things are not working the way I expect them to as an employee. And finally, or a couple of more things, you'll need you should think about being, or you need to be, a great place to work for other reasons. And of course, commitment to market rate may undermine other opportunities. So think about that when you're thinking about, paying at market. Lastly, on this section, you may make a deliberate decision. Again, don't accidentally find out that that's what you're doing. Be deliberate about, I'm now paying above market rates. Now, there are times, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. There are times where you decide to pay above market rates for some positions in your company, but not all. It's not a one size fits all for all your positions. You could be looking at a particular role that is very hard to fill, and you've been at recruiting this role for forever and a day. What role can I think of quickly? Machine learning engineer based in the middle of nowhere. And you're really desperate for this role. It's a key role. Don't act out of desperation. Think very calmly and strategically about what you want to do. But you may be thinking, I am going to pay above market rate for these hard to find roles or hard to fill, which is why workforce planning and succession planning are extremely important for when you're thinking about your organizational structure, which is another webinar for another day, and other webinars we've done before as well. But you want to be more competitive, and you want to attract talent in that space, hence why you're paying above market. What happens when you do that is a couple of things that I want to just unpack. It can be expensive to maintain. If I start with a big expensive salary and I'm expecting salary increases along the way, that can become a long-term issue for you, especially with market fluctuation. So thinking long-term is also important. Can lead to unwanted retention and those golden handcuffs. So employees that no longer love the work but can't afford to leave. I used to think, no, surely it's all about loving the work, and surely people leave out of, yeah, I used to think that. And a lot of employees and, and employers say to me, I really want to leave, but I can't afford to. Or this person wants to leave, but they can't be paid anything else outside. So how do I re-engage them, make sure they're happy and they're actually doing the work, because productivity starts to dip. And lastly, this can lead to organizations not focusing on the culture pieces because, hey, we pay a lot of money. So, we pay you a lot of money. Don't worry about culture. Don't worry about the fruit bowl in the kitchen. Don't worry about the benefits. Don't worry about that manager being not nice to you. You get paid a lot of money for that, right? So just be careful not to fall into that trap. It's very important. I think I'm handing over back to you, Julie, for pay parity.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this slide and the next slide so we have some time to finish up the conversation about how to have those conversations, and we have time for a Q&A. So this is very similar to, the pieces that Nicole was just talking about there, right? That market parity. So pay parity, we were talking about, is it fair? Like, are we paying fair? And what are you paying? Where's the fairness? So paying market parity means you're paying fair to a market in one place or another. You're looking for an HR coordinator. Is the salary that you're paying very consistent to what all HR coordinators in your area, in your type of sector are being paid, right? It is hard to assess. The pay data is held privately. However, with the Pay Transparency Act, you're seeing a lot more on postings before. We used to never see this on job postings before. So it is becoming more clear. And then internal pay parity, right? If employees are starting to be able to talk about what they're getting paid, you really want to start looking at the internal pay parity. And you might not have had that in the past, but you can take a chance now to have a look at it, decide whether you do have any real outliers there, and is there a reason to justify that outlier, or are there some people that actually do need to be bumped up to match that internal pay parity? And does your pay scale make sense? So that was the structured piece we were talking about. And then like for like pay parity, right? So people in identical or similar roles being paid fairly. And that's where you might build a bit of an actual matrix that shows your roles. Like, HR coordinator is the same as a finance coordinator. Therefore, we're going to see similar pay between those two roles, right? So you're wanting to build that. And that's where, working with MyHR, we can definitely help you with that type of work, or another consultant can help you with that type of work. And at no point can you take into account gender, religion, or parental status around those pay parity. That's where we're trying to build that piece there. So what do we recommend? We recommend you making a decision and you're transparent about that decision. Like Nicole said and Sylvia alluded to, right? You can keep it ad hoc, but you want to have some reasons around that. Where are the good reasons that I've worked for places where we say we play at the 25th percentile. So we're a growing, expanding business. There's tons of opportunity. You get to travel here. It's exciting. You get all these different perks. And realistically, we're going to pay at the 25th percentile versus market. So, yeah, be transparent about it. The next one on the list is um, decide, yeah, be transparent so employees know what to make. I recommend personally, I don't know if either would agree, the once a year piece, right? So that you don't want to be looking at it all year round. And then people say, well, what if someone started just 3 months before the anniversary? You can decide whether, their performance has shown you something very different and you want to improve, to change their pay at that point, or you would wait the full sort of 15, 16 months to do it at that point. So anniversary date, same for performance reviews. I have the same recommendation. Do it once a year, get everyone sorted on it rather than trying to do it every single anniversary date. Have ranges for positions, right? So really, I like to see the ranges for positions there, right? That you're going to have it. There's going to be a range for each position, and those are the ranges you would post on your job descriptions as well. And then adjusting ranges based on cost of living increases. So even if you don't have a lot of money to increase salaries, you're paying attention to the cost of living and looking at that there. So those are our core recommendations. And it's over to Nicole for a couple of minutes on how to have the pay conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. This is our last section before questions. So always be prepared and do your homework before the conversation. That's a big one for me. Some of these may be crucial conversations. So you're preparing for your own emotional state. It could be a very easy conversation to have. Well done, great year, or, we've done really well as a business. Here's your 5% increase. Thanks for coming. Like, we will give you a script in a minute about all of these, but I want to quickly just take a minute to say, where there is a crucial conversation, follow a bit of a crucial conversation model, which is checking in with your own mindset and going in prepared with your own emotional awareness there as well. So set the expectations and prevent surprises, even internal surprises in terms of how you're going to react to their reaction. So in here, big tip from us is give your team regular updates about the business and economy during the year. So there aren't any surprises around the correlation between our financial performance and the increases that we can afford to give. From there, you'll want to also be prepared to support your decision with data rather than sort of being umming and ahhing in the meeting and not being that prepared. So you've reviewed the role, the job description, the potential for the employee. You've looked at market data. You've looked at comparable roles internally, externally. You've really gone as prepared as you can into that conversation. We can't emphasize that enough. And of course, separating pay discussions from performance reviews is important. So you can focus in one meeting on the feedback, positive or constructive, and in one meeting on the outcome, and obviously making sure that that is either acceptable, or if it's not, you're having an opportunity to discuss why it's not as well. So a little bit of a script for you for having the conversation. Set the scene, explain the factors that were considered, call out any contributions from a performance point of view, and provide that data where you have it. Be clear on the detail, answer the questions, update your systems, provide a letter and update systems. It's a quick and easy, powerful script to kind of keep you on track for those conversations. And as I said, stay emotionally checked in if there is a difficult conversation that you're about to have or you've just had. If there's an unhappy employee, some things to share with you all around how to respond. And chances are you will have those. Sometimes you won't have it straight away in that meeting. Some employees, and I see this all the time, managers come to me and say, but they were okay in the meeting and they accepted the outcome. And now 2 weeks later, they're not happy. What's that about? People take time to process if they're surprised, or people need to work up the courage to come back to you and say that they're not happy. What you want to be grateful for is that they're sharing those thoughts out loud, especially if they're a good performer, rather than resigning or leaving you. So acknowledge their view and disappointment about the outcome, go back with the reasons for the decision, confirm that you understand what they're after. Sometimes you'll change, you'll negotiate something. Sometimes you'll stay to, actually, I hear you. It is, it's this number, it's this increase, it's not going to change, but let's unpack a little bit more what else we can do. And I'll show you a script for that shortly as well. And finally, have a frank conversation. Ideally, the biggest takeaway from this is please make sure you prevent putting yourself in a position where this is the first time that the employee is hearing from you that they're not doing a good job, or the increase wasn't the increase they expected because of A, B, and C that they didn't do. I want you to give them that feedback as soon as that performance issue occurs, so that there are no surprises at the end of the year or in the middle of the year or whenever you're having that conversation. So finally, to wrap us up before questions, a little bit of a script around how you would structure that conversation. I understand you're disappointed about this increase. To recap, here are the things we've considered when making our decision. Can I just confirm you're looking for 8%? Here's what I need from you. Let's make a plan to get us to that, extra 5%. Let's make a plan for the deliverables for the next 3, 6, 12 months. Can you share some market data that supports your position? Finally, our decision is final. This doesn't reflect, your pay doesn't reflect the value of your role. This is all we can afford at the moment, for example, or whatever it is. But stay true to your decision if you genuinely cannot move, and think about what else you can do for that individual. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Sylvie to lead us with questions. There's some really juicy ones in there, so let's go.
Nice one. Well, thank you everyone for submitting your questions. We have had many come through as we've gone through this content, which is not a surprise. Because we've had live questions from people that we know are on the call, as well as these pre-submitted ones, I will jump into a couple of the live ones and I'll direct them to myself or Nicole or Julie if there's kind of a clear country bias. And then we'll jump into some of the pre-prepared ones just to make sure we're trying to cover off as many bases as we can today. So jumping into our live questions, Anonymous says, and I'll direct this one to Julie perhaps, we have a number of staff that are on the social work pay equity pay scale. We have some staff that are at the top of their band already, or actually a step or more above where they should sit. We have historically been putting staff up annually in July. However, this is now becoming an expectation, and we're wondering what should our stance be on this come July this year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I see I see that happen a lot, a tendency to increase everyone every year. And before you know it, they're quite a ways out of the band. So what I like to have is a conversation around how compensation actually works. And essentially that the amount a person's paid for their role should be tied to the work that they're actually doing, right? So increasing pay year after year after year when the role doesn't change in complexity is a problem. And also trying to find that next career progression step, it may not be there either. So what I like to do is I like to have a conversation around, this is what the band, this is what we expect to pay for a role like yours. You are here at this level, right? We don't see an opening above it, but we want to help you continue to learn and grow so that you're ready for that position that opens up above you, or we can support you in transitioning to a higher level role in another organization. So hard to talk about people leaving the organization, but a frank conversation does have to be had that you are kind of at the top of your range, right? We just can't keep paying more for the same role all the time. So really important that you're tying compensation to the work that people are doing. It's not just their performance, right? Their performance is amazing. It's fantastic, but you can cap out in a role. And so that's what that conversation needs to be had about capping out and what do they want to learn in order to be able to move to that next role.
Nice one. Thank you, Julie. Question from David about the new New Zealand law about being able to talk about your pay. Kia ora, Sylvie. Quick question with the Employee Rem Disclosure Act. Obviously, staff are now able to talk if they want to about their pay with others outside their manager. However, as the employer, are we obliged to enter into that conversation? For example, person A and person B say they want to talk to us about their pay. As an employer, can we say that we only want to discuss individual rem with individual people, or would it be considered negative conduct to not have a more open conversation. David, that's a brilliant question. If you are on individual employment agreements with your employees, so assuming there isn't a collective agreement in place, you're just on an IEA, you are totally within your rights to say, we at our business or our company don't discuss pay collectively. I'm very happy to talk to people one-on-one about their remuneration. I can't stop you guys discussing amongst yourselves, but when it comes time to review remuneration reviews or kind of one-off exceptional requests for pay increases, those conversations will be held one-on-one. And if you are open and kind of transparent about that, and people know that's how pay gets managed in those one-to-one kind of relationships, I think over time it probably wouldn't be a problem. Something you might want to think about though is to think about whether if your staff have an appetite to be chatting about their pay together and kind of negotiating with their employers as a group, that's behaviour where a union can sometimes be a useful intermediary because they are a more organised, experienced party who can help manage those kind of collective conversations. So potentially an avenue there to look to see if there's a union who might be able to provide support. On the other hand, it maybe shows that there is a need for a bit more transparency in the business or in the organisation. So sharing information about your pay bands, sharing information about what average pay is within teams. There are varying kind of steps along the spectrum of zero pay transparency from the employer to sharing a spreadsheet that has every single person's pay in it. So potentially there are some things you might want to look at or consider in terms of being a bit more transparent about pay so that you're not kind of fielding these cliques or kind of units of people who want to be negotiating pay with you collectively rather than on a one-to-one. So I'll jump into our pre-prepared questions and then come back to our live questions and just again kind of be jumping back and forth. So let's jump in and have a look at ones that people submitted earlier. So question here, and I'll pop this one to Nicole. How do we respond to questions about salary where staff have knowledge of colleague salaries and use this to advocate for their own salary increase? So a similar topic to the one that we've just asked. And Nicole, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've just spoken about pay transparency, you now know that people are, what you can't reprimand someone for sharing what they're paid. That whole pay transparency legislation changes. So you will have that scenario where someone says, hey, Nicole's on $10 more, what's going on there? And if you're looking at your remuneration every so often and you're doing you're supporting your reviews with the data and the competencies and the experience and the skills, then chances are you will have an answer ready to go in terms of where, Nicole's a senior sandwich maker and you're a mid-level sandwich maker in our capability framework. That's why she's on $10 more, because she does these extra tasks and you don't. That could be an easy conversation to have. So you're linking it back to the skills and the actual role and the work involved. If it's like, hang on a minute, we're both mid-level sandwich makers, and yet she's still getting $10 more, those are going to become trickier for you to handle. It could be that Nicole was with you for 20 years additional, and she's been sitting there with her beautiful 5% pay rise every July. And so no one's ever going to catch up to her. So there's that kind of openness around, tenure and experience, and people who have been here longer have done X, Y, Z. So it's never going to be comfortable to talk about. It's never going to be an answer that the individual is likely to want to hear. But you want to be in the background, making sure that as closely as you can, people who are doing the same job are getting paid the same amount, which is where that structure helps get you out of those situations.
Nice.
Thanks, Evie.
Thanks, Nicole. And Julie, a question for you perhaps. How do we explain a pay decision that was implied but not promised by a predecessor who no longer works here? What advice would you give to this person?
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about is maybe a pay increase that didn't actually go into action, right? So someone promised something and then it didn't go into action. I think that's just about the employee having a clear conversation, or the employer having a clear conversation, and it can just start with an exploratory conversation, right? So I've heard you mention this, describe the situation to me, describe what was happening, and then you would take that away and do some digging and do some, like Nicole said, about prepping for the conversation. So find out what the issue is, what was promised, what didn't happen, when was that all there, and then do your own research. How does that fit in with what others are being paid? How does that fit in with the market rate and values? And then you're going back to the employee and having a conversation. So saying, this is where we're actually at. This is where the business is at. This is what I can do for you. And in order to get you to that piece, right, like the same as the unhappy employee conversation, this is what we would need to see. We're seeing a lot of that kind of in the chat there around the idea of like, what if we can't afford a pay increase? And I think in this economy, sorry, I'm Sylvia, I'm just going to jump into that one from that one. I'm seeing a lot of that. It's some tough economic times, right? For us all personally, the cost of groceries, the cost of living is high, but that's also being felt by businesses. And it's not the business's responsibility to carry that. You need to do the best you can with the financial resources you have available. And you know what? It may be a conversation that, you know what, we can't afford to increase anyone's salary this year. You've seen this happen. You've seen where we're at with the current clients we're servicing. We don't want to eliminate staff. So instead, we've chose to hold our salaries where they are and, look for other ways to make work fun or to make the culture amazing, to kind of, and you're risking turnover, but you know what? That's just what you have to do sometimes, right? Is you have to hold steady on the wages and risk that turnover. We mentioned cost of living a few times, right? Do we have to give a cost of living increase? No, but that is about trying to stay with market parity. So it's all those factors combined together there to help you make your decisions. Oh, you muted, Sylvie.
Thanks for that catch. A great answer, Julie. And I think too that piece around if there are other levers that you have to pull to add value to people's time with you. I worked with a small furniture making business a few years ago who was really struggling. It was the middle of COVID. No hotels or restaurants were doing fit outs, so they had kind of no big orders for furniture to build and design. And what they did was they gave all of their team an extra week of annual leave for that year. So rather than having in New Zealand 4 weeks off, they had 5 weeks off. And obviously that's not going to help with every single person's situation, but the extra paid time away from work was kind of enough to go, we get it, it sucks, we'd like to give you pay increases, but we can't. Here's this thing that we can do to show you that it's not about you, it's about kind of our broader economic circumstances and how we manage things. So this question here, how does the labour wage index factor into business decisions broadly? Is it a foundational factor or suggested info? Everything is always suggested. You are the boss in your own business. You can choose what you take on or not. But having a look at the consumer price index or the CPI in New Zealand or whatever your kind of cost of living or cost of labour index is a good way to understand how much you may need to increase people's pay by to meet the market. Not every business does a cost of living increase every year. So businesses will do more than that if the value of their particular roles has shifted. But it's a good benchmark to understand particularly what your staff might be looking to expect. So it's information for you to absorb into your decision-making process. It's not necessarily a requirement or an expectation in terms of pay increases that you might give. Let's jump back into our live cost of living. Anonymous asks, and this question came in quite early in the session, can you pay based on an employee's situation, like whether they're single or whether they're married with 3 kids? And I think this came in on the slide where we were talking about you can pay based on performance and experience, but you can't pay based on their gender or their religion and so on. Nicole, did you want to take a stab at answering that one? What are your views?
I was wondering if you were going to throw this one to me. This is a dangerous territory in that you risk having different businesses interpret that differently, which is why the answer is no. For example, you may have a bias towards a single employee works longer hours, therefore they deserve a higher salary. And then you'll have the business next door with a bias towards a married employee with 6 kids, has a lot of kids, to feed, I'm going to pay them more. So that those differences in the way businesses are going to interpret these situations opens up to a really kind of huge gaps and inequity and sort of inequality in a particular region or market or country. So generally, you're paying for the role that is being performed, regardless of the personal circumstances. Hope that helped. That was a hard one.
Yeah, great response, Nicole. I'd agree with that. I think too, in New Zealand, your marital status, like whether you're single or in a de facto relationship or a civil union or married, is a protected category of discrimination. So if you had other employees who, with all of these pay transparency laws, finds out that their married colleague gets paid 20 grand a year more than them because they've got more mouths to feed, or vice versa, if you have a married employee who finds that they're single, works all hours, works all weekends, colleague is getting paid 20k more, you might find yourself on the hook for a human rights claim, which is much more expensive than an employment relations claim. So definitely something to be considered in terms of those protected categories, hey? And we'll jump back into our questions on our screen here. We're at 10:59 for time. I've got space to stick around and answer a few more questions. Nicole and Julie, are you both clear? Have you got a hard stop at 11? Yeah, I'm getting some nods. Fabulous. So, Julie, this will be a question for you. So we are a small business, around 25 staff, so we've got people with a range of start dates. As a result, their anniversary dates are all over the place. So being able to align annual performance reviews and REM reviews has always been problematic. Is there a solution to this or a rule that we can implement to save on all the admin hassle but still be fair to our staff?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of one time a year because I think if you're doing it all year long, you're not going to get everybody. You're going to miss people. And plus, it's always something you have to do. I've seen lots of businesses that try and do it on the anniversary date. And the problem is you're just not got your head around a performance review. So I find it gets scheduled and then it gets pushed and it gets pushed and it gets pushed, or a pay increase. And that's actually worse, right? Scheduling it and pushing it is much worse than annualizing people. So I recommend that annualizing everyone to whatever date matches your calendar year. You know, in Canada, you can have a year end that's anytime during the year. I know New Zealand is always March 31st. So, you know, you might have, oh, maybe not always. You might have, choose that all of your pay increases are going to happen in May, right? So you're going to choose that date. So let's say you have someone that starts in February. You know what? You might be like, you know what? We're not going to manage it. We're not going to do a pay increase conversation in May. We probably will do a performance conversation because I think it doesn't matter. You might be in the probation or early days, but you can still have that performance conversation. It sets the stage for next year. But you're just going to be very clear with someone and have that transparent conversation. So when you're looking at your number of employees and you're looking at their start date, you would just front load that conversation with the 3 or 4 employees that are not going to be up for a pay increase because they started recently. You just have that conversation saying, hey, we're going to leave your salary where it is this year. We feel fair that we brought you in at the right level. But, you know, we do it annually and you'll be up for a pay increase conversation next year. So, yeah, that's my recommendation on that one.
Nice one. Thank you, Julie. We'll do one more pre-submitted one, then jump back into our live ones that have come through. We are at time for our webinar, so if you need to shoot off and go to the next thing in your day, you're very welcome to. Thank you for joining us. The recording of this webinar, as I mentioned earlier, will be available afterwards. You'll get an email with a link. So if you need to go but want to come back to see the questions, you're very welcome to do so. We still have about 100 people on the call, so people are sticking around. We'll keep working through this and working through our questions and then aim to finish at about 1:15. So let's jump into our next question here. Nicole, I'll throw this one to you to start, hey? How do we handle questions or comments around Australian versus New Zealand wage comparisons? We comment that it's a very different market, and we also mention the other benefits they receive. However, is there a better way to tackle this comment? For a bit of context for our Canadian listeners, pay rates in Australia tend to be higher than in New Zealand for a whole bundle of reasons. I expect that this comment is coming from a New Zealand employer who is having trouble competing with pay rates in Sydney and in Perth. So Nicole, do you have some thoughts about this question?
Yeah, thank you. To the person who asked the question, just to confirm, you are very much on the right track in terms of the commentary around the difference in markets, the difference in the economies of the countries. So there's probably, my advice would be that not knowing what your exact script is around that, there's probably opportunity to sort of build that out a little bit more around cost of living. CPI percentages are different. One's 3.8 last I looked, one's 3.2, Australia's 3.8. And so that you could kind of beef that script out or build that script out with more data is my first advice. And of course, you're definitely on the right track mentioning the other benefits that they receive. The next layer from here is that you're looking at the role that they're in. If you recall, I spoke briefly about job family frameworks or capability frameworks. So the role that they're doing, what is that paying from a New Zealand perspective versus an Australian perspective? That's going to be a different sort of flavor if it's someone in the sales team versus someone in the customer success team or in the kitchen and so on. So there's probably a little bit of work for you to do around what does that role look like. For example, you can comfortably say it has been extremely hard to hire this really hard to fill position in Queensland, Australia, which is why we paid that person a little bit more in addition to the Australian environment. Or the reverse could be true of it was really hard to find this person in Wellington and we needed them to be in Wellington, so we're paying them more. Regardless of the country, there's also, is there a role-centric reason as well as the company, as well as the environment or the economy of the two countries?
The cynical part of me, Nicole, says to say to someone, if you want Australian money, you need to move to Australia because we can't be paying. Why? Let's not look at rates that you would get paid in India for this type of work. Oh, look at that. It's 90% less than you would be getting paid here. It's really it's impractical to be considering pay across different countries. You could cherry pick any country to compare your pay to and come out significantly better off or significantly worse off. So sometimes it's a bit of an education piece with your staff, but feel very free to shut that down just to kind of back up what Nicole was saying. And certainly with my cynicism of many years of dealing with these kinds of comments in the New Zealand environment, just tell them they need to move if they want that kind of cash. So jumping back to our live questions, we've got quite a few here around what do we do if someone's at the top of their pay range and either wants more money or the cost of living increase kind of would keep bumping them over, or sort of the role hasn't changed and they kind of want more cash. I think the first question I would ask is, do your pay ranges accurately reflect the value of these roles to your business still? And do you care about the consequences if you stick to them and people are unhappy? The reason I point that out is your pay ranges should be there to simplify decision making rather than to be a process that handcuffs you and hobbles you and means you can't deal with reasonable requests for pay increases. So one, check that your pay ranges are still kind of accurate and still useful. Two, check in to make sure that your people who are kind of at the top of the range are being paid fairly based on all other factors like cost of living and all the other pieces. The third thing I would suggest is if you are choosing to not pay these people more, the cost may be that they resign, or the cost may be that they are disgruntled and unhappy and kind of run their mouth off to everyone else they work with around the fact that they've been here this many years and are still getting paid what someone with 5 years less experience, there just might be a bit of disgruntlement happening. Are you okay with those consequences? If you are, fine, stick to your pay bands. If you're not okay with those consequences, either figure out what an argument might be for getting this person the increase that they're looking for, or an increase you think is reasonable, or have a look at seeing whether adjusting your pay bands is necessary. Pay bands are a tool to simplify decision making. If they are hurting your business in other ways, they are not a good fit for purpose tool. So have a look at whether that's might be something that you can explore.
Sylvie, if I could just add something there. One thing to think about is, if you're an owner for the business and you're doing a whole bunch of things that you might be able to hand a few things off that then allows that person to grow into a bit of a bigger role. I see that a lot in businesses with 10, 15, 20 employees where the owners are doing it all and they have really loyal employees, and there may be an opportunity to provide a little bit of growth there. You give yourself a bit of a break, you take a bit of the stress off, and it costs you $1 or $2 more an hour, but you're getting that growth for that employee, that continued commitment, and you're getting something back in terms of being able to maybe stand back from the day-to-day operations of your business, look at the bigger picture and go, hey, how do I want to grow this thing? Or what other services could we get into? So try not to have to own it all. Sometimes that push up against the salary band is a good opportunity to go, maybe I do have someone here that I could grow into the business.
Yeah, great contribution. Thanks, Julie. Good call out. Next one. Nicole, I'll jump in with this one here. We've got quite a few questions around what happens if we just want to pay for performance. So the question that was submitted was, how do you answer questions about inflationary increases when you're a pay for performance culture? And the live question that came in that was similar was, can you just pay based on performance? How would you respond, Nicole?
Yeah, and I mean, yes, you can pay based on performance. You can pay based on inflationary increases only, and you can also not pay, as you heard us say, if someone's above market and you decide not to pay them, you can also do that. Like all of these are absolutely options available for you. The question is, how do you answer those? So it goes back to that education piece with your team members around how we do compensation around here. So it could be that you could have 2 or 3 slides as part of your town hall, explaining your compensation approach rather than, which will save you a lot of one-on-one conversations, or you could have an ask me anything session and your employees ask those questions openly. I think the answer to this is the education up front to sort of prevent those sort of reactive questions after you tell someone their increase, or being open about, we have a pay for performance culture and this is our approach. This is what that means for high performers. This is what it means for effective performers. Be open if you can around the scale of increases that you're working with, and therefore this doesn't take into consideration inflation. Being as sort of open with that as possible, but my preference is to educate beforehand to help you run a smooth process.
Adding to that too, it does lock you into increases. Well, the expectation is people will get increases if they've had a smashing year. Even if your business lost a major contract, has had a 20% rent increase, your supplies have gone up 15%. If your team can fairly point to their performance reviews or can point to their deliverables and go, I had a stellar year, I would like a 10% increase, please. But you just aren't in the financial position to do so. Have a think about whether there would ever be circumstances that would mean you would want to have an explanation or a way to manage expectations around pay that wasn't just based on the values of the business, along with bad attitude, culture erosion, and so on.
Yeah, 100%. And like Nicole said, ideally, they're not hearing about those challenges in that pay increase letter, right? So that those challenges are being coming up all the way along, or there's been multiple conversations about that. So that obviously, when it comes time to pay increase, even before the pay increase time, you've got this person on a performance improvement plan, or you've had real conversations about it, so that we're going to be saying to them, like, it is salary increase time. You and I have had lots of conversations recently about where your performance is at, and we need to actually get you moving in the right direction and increase your performance, and then we can look at salary. If you haven't had that, there's no time like the present, right? At any point in time, you need to have a conversation about where performance is at. I like them to be separated from pay, but if you can't separate them and they have to be separated, you got to say what's actually there for the person. And my recommendation would be specific examples of the behavior you're seeing that doesn't match a commitment to working with the person to improve the behavior, and not seeing the actual lack of a pay increase as a punishment, but just as an indicator that we're not there for a pay increase yet. It's not yet, right? We have some things we need to work on before we would look at that, rather than you're not getting a pay increase because of all these things. So just reframing that slightly would be my recommendation.
Nice. Thank you, Julie. And a question from a New Zealand attendee. Anonymous asks, if one of your staff has been off for 6 months with ACC and is now back, can you postpone their pay review for this reason, as they've got the annual leave and sick leave, i.e. costs to the business, over the time they've been away? I would recommend going ahead with the pay review piece, but as part of the factors that you are assessing, the fact that they were away for 6 months, maybe didn't hit their deliverables, maybe haven't developed in terms of the skills or the competencies that they have in the role as much, and that might be the reason you choose not to give them an increase this time around. Avoiding doing the review will give them 2 things to be grumpy about. One, they didn't get a pay increase and you didn't even talk to them about it, so suddenly they're twice as grumpy as they might be. Going ahead with the review conversation doesn't mean you have to commit to a pay increase. At no point, unless it's written somewhere that you will increase their pay, you don't have to increase people's pay as part of a review conversation, but going ahead and doing the review means you can lay out your reasons for the discussion, you're being transparent about the decision, and you're not giving them something else to be grumpy with you about on top of not getting a pay increase. Jumping down, we will do one more of the pre-submitted ones. We've answered this question in terms of someone's being paid way over bracket, so unlikely to get a pay increase. And critically, how do we not give pay increases but not have it turn into a negative conversation? I think I speak for all of us when I say that we've been pretty clear that you need to be transparent about why the pay increase isn't happening. Is it because the business is in a tricky financial situation? Is it because the employee is at the top of their band? Is it because you have concerns around their behaviour and the way they're showing up at work? Is it because they just had a shitty year and didn't deliver what was asked of them, and so you don't think a pay increase is justified? Whatever the reason is, be transparent, talk it through, make sure the person understands your reasons. You don't have to convince them that you're in the right. People very rarely will agree that they're wrong for wanting more money. You don't have to try and convince them, but make it clear what the reasons are. And if there is a particular increase that they were looking for and didn't get, or even if it was just a cost of living increase that they were expecting but hasn't happened, lay out a plan for getting them to the pay that they want. Whether that's, I need to see a significant shift in your attitude and your behavior at work, or the business frankly needs to be profitable again before we can be considering pay increases. Here's what you can contribute in your role to make sure that we're making money, or here's what I need to see to get you from a $2,000 increase to a $10,000 increase. Let's make sure that you're picking up extra tasks from the senior sandwich maker in your team, or that you're shadowing kind of critical client meetings with a senior account manager, so that as your skills and competencies increase, the value delivered to the business increases, and therefore we give you more money. So be transparent, be clear, talk about it, have a plan, and then deliver on that plan and making sure that you're showing up for your expectations. So those were all the pre-submitted questions that we had. We still have quite a few coming through in the Q&A, but we're going to have to be thinking about wrapping up because we're now at time. So look, thank you so much for attending today. We know that taking time out of your day is always a commitment, and we trust that you've had some value out of this conversation. If you have a specific question that wasn't answered, or if after this call you think of something that you'd like our input on, here are our email addresses for how you can get in touch. I'm sure I speak for both Nicole and Julie when I say that we would be happy to have a chat with you just to see what this conversation has sparked. And the recording will be available again, and slides will go around in an email that follows up with the session too. So to my co-presenters, Nicole and Julie, thank you for coming along with me this morning, especially Nicole with an early morning start. I look forward to collaborating with you again, but thanks, we'll see you next time.
Thank you everyone that attended, and thank you, Sylvia and Nicole.
Thanks, team. Thanks, everyone. Bye.